This is the story of Shallum, a man who learned that ambition without God's blessing collapses quickly and leaves no legacy of peace. Once upon a time, in a palace carved from pale limestone high on a windy hill, Shallum stood before a mirror made of polished bronze. He stared into his own eyes as if trying to convince himself he was already a king. Shallum had always been clever. Too clever, some whispered. As a boy, he could memorize the entire list of tribal leaders faster than any scribe. His mind was sharp as a hawk's talon, but his heart was restless as a dry riverbed waiting for rain. He was a commander in the royal guard serving under King Zechariah. People praised his skill with the sword and his quick mind for strategy. But behind their praise, Shallum heard another sound, the echo of his own name missing from every scroll of glory. He longed for more. Not just for command, but for the crown itself, the shining proof that he was greater than all the quiet whispers of his ancestors who had lived and died in shadows. Abner, his closest friend since youth, was one of the few who knew his secret heart. Abner was a broad-shouldered, kind-eyed warrior who preferred simple life, training young guards, tending his olive trees in the evening, and humming old war songs by the fire. One night, under a sky blanketed with stars, Shallum and Abner sat on a roof overlooking the torchlit courtyards. Shallum's eyes glimmered like coals in the dark. "Abner," Shallum began, voice low but burning, "have you ever felt like you were meant for more than this? Like there's a fire inside you that won't let you sleep until the world knows your name?" Abner studied him quietly. "You have a strong sword arm and a stronger mind," he said. "But if you chase a crown without God's blessing, it might turn to dust in your hands." Shallum laughed, but there was no joy in it. "Dust? No, my friend. Gold. I will shape this kingdom into something fierce and unbreakable. Zechariah is weak. He listens to priests more than soldiers, sings psalms while enemies sharpen their swords." Abner's brow furrowed. "Zechariah is chosen," he said firmly. "He may be gentle, but the Lord's hand rests on him." Shallum's gaze turned cold and distant, as if he were looking past Abner to a throne only he could see. "Chosen or not," he murmured almost to himself, "if he cannot protect this kingdom, someone else must. Someone strong enough to act." Abner fell silent, watching his friend slip deeper into ambition's shadow. Days later, Shallum stood in the royal training yard before sunrise. He practiced alone, each sword stroke slicing the cold air, his breath rising in sharp clouds. Every move was perfect, but every move also carried a silent question. When will they see me? That night, as the moon rose above the palace walls, Shallum made his choice. He gathered a small group of loyal captains in the armory, the torchlight flickering across their uneasy faces. "We move tonight," he said, voice low and sharp as steel. "Zechariah has had his time. Tomorrow, Israel wakes to a new king, one unafraid to act." Abner stood at the edge of the group, his jaw tight, eyes heavy with grief. He didn't speak. In that moment, he saw his friend's face as both familiar and foreign, the face of a man who had traded service for glory. When the others left, Abner approached, his voice shaking. "Shallum, don't do this. There is still time to turn back." Shallum turned to him, eyes burning. "The time for waiting is over," he hissed. "If you cannot stand beside me, stay out of my way." Abner's shoulders sagged, and he turned away, tears pooling in his eyes as he disappeared into the dark hall. Alone, Shallum looked down at his reflection in a polished shield, tracing the edges of his own face with a trembling finger. "King," he whispered to himself, trying to believe it. "At last." Above him, the moon seemed to hang lower, watching like a silent witness to what was about to unfold. The throne room smelled like cedar and cold iron. Shallum walked slowly toward the high seat, every step echoing through the stone chamber like a heartbeat. Behind him, the new captains of his guard stood in stiff silence, unsure whether they had just made history or a mistake. Zechariah's blood had already dried on the stones of the courtyard. The old king hadn't fought back. He had only looked at Shallum with a strange calm, as if he had expected it all along. That look haunted Shallum now. He sat down on the throne and pressed both hands to its carved arms. They were smoother than he expected, ancient, worn by the hands of better men. He cleared his throat. "Well," he said, glancing at the captains, "why are you all standing like statues? You wanted strength. You followed me. Now act like it." One of the captains, a young man named Pedaiah, stepped forward. "What would you have us do, my lord?" Shallum looked up at the stained glass windows above the throne, where sunlight cast patterns of crimson and gold across his feet. "Send word," he said. "Let the cities know the throne is mine. Any loyal to the house of Jehu are to surrender their posts immediately. No delays, no mercy." Pedaiah bowed and left. Alone now, Shallum leaned forward, elbows on knees, and whispered, "1 month. That's all I need. 1 month to show them I was the right choice." He didn't hear the footsteps approaching behind him. It was Abner. Shallum turned but didn't stand. "You came," he said. "I thought you'd left." Abner didn't return the smile. His voice was flat. "I came to see if the man I knew still lives." Shallum stood slowly. "Don't start with your sermons." "I'm not here to preach," Abner said. "I'm here because I remember a boy who wanted to protect this nation, not choke it to wear its crown." Shallum's face tightened. "That boy was naive." "No," Abner replied, stepping closer. "That boy had faith. This man? He has nothing but fear and pride." Silence. Finally, Shallum walked past him, heading to the balcony that overlooked the courtyard. He stared out over the city, its rooftops glowing in the late morning light. "They'll thank me, you know," he said, "when I bring order. When I crush the Assyrians, strengthen our walls, and silence the prophets who keep weeping about destruction." "They won't thank you," Abner said quietly. "They'll bury you, or forget you." Shallum turned around, rage flashing in his eyes, but underneath it, something cracked. "Why can't you just be proud of me?" Abner's voice softened. "Because I'd rather see you humble and alive than proud and gone." Then, without another word, Abner left the room. Shallum stood there, gripping the balcony rail until his knuckles went white. Below, the people moved like ants, unaware that their new king stood watching, already unsure whether he'd won anything at all. And far off at the edge of the city, an old prophet lit a small fire and whispered the words of warning God had placed on his heart. That night, Shallum couldn't sleep. He lay on a bed too soft, beneath silks too heavy, in a palace too silent. The gold around him gleamed like stolen sunlight, but it brought him no peace. He sat up, rubbing his temples. Outside, The wind brushed against the pillars like whispers. He rose and paced the room, stopping at the small chest his late father had given him long ago, a reminder of humbler days. He opened it. Inside were scraps of parchment from his youth, drawings of shields, prayers written in shaky handwriting, and one old note from his father. Courage is not seizing power, my son. It is carrying the weight of others with clean hands. He slammed the chest shut. Clean hands don't build kingdoms, Shallum muttered to himself. The door creaked open. It was Ithiel, his advisor. The man had once served Zechariah. Now he wore a new sash, one embroidered with Shallum's name. My king, Ithiel said, eyes careful. Word from the outer cities. Samaria remains uncertain. Some still mourn Zechariah. Then we give them something new to celebrate, Shallum snapped. A parade, bread for the poor, songs in the square. They won't love you with gifts, Ithiel said quietly. Shallum stepped toward him. Then they'll obey me with fear. Ithiel did not flinch. You're not the first man to think that. You won't be the last to fall because of it. Shallum turned away, jaw clenched. I want the temple priests gathered at sunrise, he ordered. They'll bless this rain, whether they believe it or not. Yes, my king. As Ithiel turned to leave, Shallum added, and find Abner. I want him at my side tomorrow, for appearances. Ithiel hesitated. You may have to earn that. When Shallum was alone again, he looked out at the city. Its lights dim, its people sleeping beneath roofs. He now ruled. He clenched his fist. I will not be forgotten, he whispered. I will be the storm that reshaped Israel. But far beyond the palace, a messenger galloped through the dark, carrying word to an old soldier named Menahem. A storm was coming indeed, but it would not be Shallum's to command. The sun rose cold and gray. Shallum stood in the grand courtyard, flanked by tall columns and soldiers dressed in polished bronze. Trumpets sounded. Dancers twirled in half-hearted celebration. The smell of roasted meat drifted through the air, but the crowd that had gathered looked unsure. Their applause was scattered and nervous. On the steps of the temple, priests chanted blessings, but their eyes did not shine with joy. They spoke the words, but their hearts remained hidden. Shallum lifted his arms. People of Israel, a new day is here. No cheer followed, only silence broken by a child's cough in the crowd. Abner stood beside him, quiet and cold. Shallum leaned toward him. You said you'd support me, Shallum whispered through gritted teeth. Where is your voice now? Abner didn't look at him. I gave you advice. You didn't take it. I gave you a throne, Shallum snapped. You took that throne with blood. Don't expect it to give you peace. Shallum turned away, his smile forced. At the edge of the crowd, a stranger in dusty robes stood alone, watching. His face was worn by sun and wind, and his eyes burned like firewood still glowing beneath the ash. Shallum saw him. He leaned to Ithiel. Who is that man? Ithiel narrowed his eyes. I don't know. He wasn't invited. The man stepped forward. No guard stopped him. No one dared. When he reached the bottom of the steps, he lifted a hand. His voice was low, but it cut through the air like thunder in a quiet room. Woe to the king who builds his name from the bones of the righteous. Woe to the one who forgets God's covenant and raises his own glory in its place. Shallum's eyes went wide. Who dares? He began. But the man continued, voice steady. You will not be buried with honor. You will not be remembered with joy. You will fall as quickly as you rose. This kingdom was not yours to steal. Shallum motioned to the guards, seize him! But when they reached the steps, the man was gone, vanished into the crowd. Shallum's breath caught in his throat. The people murmured. Even the priests looked shaken. Find that man, Shallum growled. Bring him to me. But in his heart, he already knew. The man was no ordinary rebel. It was a warning from heaven, and Shallum had no answer. Shallum stood in the shadows of the throne room, his fingers tightening around the edges of his new robe. The gold thread stitched into the fabric caught the candlelight, but they didn't impress him like he thought they would. Behind him, the guards stood silent, his guards now. Everything had changed in just a few days. Zechariah was gone. The people had cheered. The high officials had bowed. The crown was on Shallum's head, but still, he didn't sleep. Your Majesty, a voice said behind him. He turned to see Hilki, the elderly priest who had served in the palace since the days of Jehu. His beard was white, his back slightly bent, but his eyes were sharp. You haven't come to the altar, Hilki said, not once since your rise. Shallum waved a hand. Later, after I've secured my seat. There's too much to organize, too many plots to watch for. Hilki frowned. You've risen without asking God, and now you rule without him too? Shallum stepped forward, voice tight. I don't need another sermon, old man. I need loyal advisors. I have always been loyal, Hilki said gently. To the Lord first, then to the king. But kings fall when they think they stand alone. Shallum's jaw clenched. I don't stand alone. I have the army, the elders, and the people. The people cheered for Jehu once too, Hilki said softly. But when his line forgot the Lord, every son fell. Shallum turned away, swallowing hard. The word stung, but he wouldn't show it. In the days that followed, he paced the palace halls like a restless lion. He changed commanders. He replaced old officials with ones loyal to him. He demanded new taxes to fund more guards, and yet he never felt secure. One night, as the wind howled outside, he stared out over the city wall. This was supposed to be my moment, he whispered. I was supposed to be remembered. But deep down, something was off. The palace didn't feel like his. The throne creaked beneath him like it was resisting his weight. Even the people who once chanted his name now glanced sideways, whispering. And far off, in the northern territories, Shallum heard rumors, whispers of a rival, Menahem, a brutal warrior with loyal troops, a man who didn't fear blood. Shallum narrowed his eyes toward the dark horizon. No one will take this from me, he said aloud. I earned this. I deserve to rule. But the wind, loud and cold, carried no answer back. The knock at the palace gates came just before dawn. It wasn't loud or urgent, just a single, steady beat. But somehow it echoed through the entire throne room like a thunderclap. A guard rushed to Shallum's chamber, breathless. Your Majesty, riders from the north. They bring a message. Shallum tightened his belt and walked quickly to the outer courtyard, where a soldier in dust-covered armor knelt with a scroll tucked into his chest plate. Speak, Shallum ordered. The man didn't stand. He looked up, sweat on his brow. Menahem, son of Gadi, has declared himself king in Tirzah. He claims the army stands with him. Shallum's heart slammed in his chest. "What army?" he asked. "All of it," the soldier whispered. The air felt like it was squeezing Shallum's throat. He stepped back, clenching his jaw. "No," he said. "They wouldn't dare." The soldier remained silent. His silence said everything. That night, Shallum sat alone in his royal study. The scrolls of the kings before him lined the wall, but he didn't look at them. He stared into the flame of a single lantern, jaw tight, mind spinning. "They cheered for me," he muttered. "I gave them hope. I brought down a corrupt king. Isn't that what they wanted?" His voice cracked at the end. From the hallway came quiet footsteps. It was Hilki again. Shallum didn't turn. "I suppose you've come to say, 'I told you so,'" he murmured. The old priest stepped forward. "Number, I've come to remind you. It's not too late to humble yourself, not before me, before God." Shallum's shoulders sagged. Would God even listen to me now? Hilki placed a hand on his shoulder. He always listens to the humble, but the proud, he tears down in a single breath. Shallum didn't respond. Later that night, he climbed the roof alone. He could see the glow of torches far to the north. Menahem's army was already on the move. A strange calm washed over him. He wasn't angry anymore. He was just tired. The throne he fought so hard to claim had never truly belonged to him. And now it was slipping through his fingers like sand. The sun rose slow and red the next morning, but Shallum never left the roof. He stayed there as the sounds of hooves thundered closer. He could see them now, dust clouds rising behind Menahem's army like smoke from a wildfire. Guards scrambled to shut the gates. Archers took their places. But no one truly believed they could stop what was coming, not even Shallum. A boy from the kitchens climbed the stairs and found him still staring north. "Sir," the boy said softly, "you haven't eaten." Shallum glanced at the bread in the boy's hand. He gave a small smile and shook his head. "No appetite for royal feast today." The boy hesitated. "Are you scared?" That question hung in the air. Shallum sighed. "I used to be afraid of being small, forgotten. Power made me feel like someone. But today, I feel small again. And strangely, I think I understand more than I ever did." Below them, trumpets sounded. The army of Menahem was at the gates. They didn't shout insults. They didn't wait. They charged. In the chaos, Shallum never drew a sword. He never put on armor. He simply walked down the palace stairs, past the rushing servants and fleeing guards, and stepped into the throne room one last time. The double doors burst open. Menahem walked in, tall, cold, confident. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He looked like a man swatting a fly. "Shallum," he said, his voice echoing, "your crown was never yours." "Not really?" Shallum stood still. "Then take it," he said. "But know this, you are not stronger than me, only swifter. One day, another will come for you too." Menahem didn't respond. He simply raised his hand, and the guards who once cheered for Shallum turned on him with cold, quiet obedience. By nightfall, Shallum was gone. Not just from the palace, but from history. His name barely remembered, his rule lasting only 1 month. His was a throne built on ambition, not calling, and such thrones crumble quickly. News of Shallum's fall swept through the land like a desert wind, quick and dry and without pity. Most people didn't mourn. Some hadn't even learned his name. Others whispered, "That's what happens when a man crowns himself without God's permission." But not everyone forgot him. There was an old scribe who had once worked quietly in the palace library. His name was Obeth, and he had watched Shallum rise and fall with weary eyes. He sat beneath a tree near the palace wall, speaking softly to a younger servant. "You saw him," the servant said. "Was he cruel?" Obeth shook his head. "Number not cruel, just restless, as if he never stopped searching for a throne to prove something." "Did he love God?" the servant asked. The old man smiled sadly. "He said God's name, but I never saw him wait on God's voice." They sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves. Obeth continued. "Shallum wanted to matter. I don't think he meant to become a thief of the throne, but wanting power too badly, it changes a man, makes him believe he can take what only God gives." The young servant frowned. "Then why let him become king at all?" Obeth looked up at the clouds. "Sometimes God allows people to rise, not because he approves, but to show what happens when we build without him. Even a palace without God as its foundation will collapse." The servant thought for a while, then nodded. "I won't chase power like that." Obeth chuckled. "Good. Chase God instead. He builds better thrones than we ever could." And as the palace bustled under Menahem's rule, the name Shallum slowly faded into a footnote. A quiet warning whispered between servants and scribes. A crown without calling is just a costume. News of Shallum's fall swept through the land like a desert wind, quick and drosh and without pity. Most people didn't mourn. Some hadn't even learned his name. Others whispered, "That's what happens when a man crowns himself without God's permission." But not everyone forgot him. There was an old scribe who had once worked quietly in the palace library. His name was Obeth, and he had watched Shallum rise and fall with weary eyes. He sat beneath a tree near the palace wall, speaking softly to a younger servant. "You saw him," the servant said. "Was he cruel?" Obeth shook his head. "Number not cruel, just restless, as if he never stopped searching for a throne to prove something." "Did he love God?" the servant asked. The old man smiled sadly. "He said God's name, but I never saw him wait on God's voice." They sat in silence, the wind rustling the leaves. Obeth continued. "Shallum wanted to matter. I don't think he meant to become a thief of the throne. But wanting power too badly, it changes a man, makes him believe he can take what only God gives." The young servant frowned. "Then why let him become king at all?" Obeth looked up at the clouds. "Sometimes God allows people to rise, not because he approves, but to show what happens when we build without him. Even a palace without God as its foundation will collapse." The servant thought for a while, then nodded. "I won't chase power like that." Obeth chuckled. "Good. Chase God instead. He builds better thrones than we ever could." And as the palace bustled under Menahem's rule, the name Shallum slowly faded into a footnote. A quiet warning whispered between servants and scribes. A crown without calling is just a costume. Shallum paced the long hallway outside the throne room. The floors gleamed, but his sandals scraped with every step. He had walked these stones as a servant, then a captain, now a king, but never had they felt so heavy beneath his feet. He turned a sharp corner and entered a smaller chamber where his personal advisors sat, men who had pledged loyalty only days before. They rose when he entered, but he barely looked at them. "Report," he said simply. One advisor stepped forward nervously. "The northern outpost. They have not sent word since yesterday. Some fear they're siding with Menahem." "Menahem!" Shallum spat the name like a curse. "That brute? He rules by fear, not wisdom." He slammed his palm against a pillar. "I brought change, justice, peace." The room fell silent. Another advisor hesitated, then spoke. "Your Majesty, peace needs time to grow. The people, they're still afraid. They don't know you yet." Shallum turned sharply. "Then let them learn. Quickly." He stormed out, robes trailing like a storm cloud behind him. But as he reached his private quarters, a voice stopped him. "Shallum," it said softly. He turned. It was his wife, calm, steady-eyed, dressed simply as always. "You haven't slept," she said. "I can't," he admitted. "How can I sleep when everything I built is crumbling?" She walked up to him, gently placing her hand on his arm. "You climbed this throne with ambition," she said. "But now that you sit on it, can you lead with peace?" Shallum looked away. "I wanted to be remembered, to do better than the kings before me." "Then listen," she said, "not just to your fear, but to God. You once believed he was with you. Have you asked him what he wants now?" He didn't answer. She kissed his cheek and left him alone with the flickering light of a single lamp. He sank into a chair, weary not just in body, but in soul. Somewhere deep inside, he wondered if his 1-month crown had always been made of sand. The sun rose behind a gray veil of clouds, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard. Shallum stood atop the outer wall, arms crossed, watching the distant hills. "Menahem is moving," came the quiet voice of his guard captain behind him. Shallum didn't turn. "How many men?" "Too many," the captain replied. "More than we can withstand. Cities to the north have already opened their gates. Some say he's promising protection. Others say he's threatening destruction." Shallum clenched the stone edge of the wall. "I promise peace, but they want power." The guard hesitated. "They want a king who can hold the line, not one they barely know." Shallum exhaled slowly. "I spent my life serving the palace. I saw the pride of kings, their vanity, their cruelty. I told myself I would be different, but now I'm not even sure I belong here." "Do you?" the captain asked gently. Shallum turned then, meeting his eyes. "I don't know." He left the wall and returned inside the palace. He passed servants who lowered their eyes. He passed halls where portraits of former kings loomed. He passed guards who once chanted his name, but now stayed silent. When he entered the small prayer chamber, no one else was there, just silence. He knelt beside the worn altar and closed his eyes. "God of our fathers," he whispered, "I asked for a crown. But I didn't ask for wisdom. I wanted to be remembered, but not like this." His voice cracked. "If you're still listening, show me what matters more than power." Just then, the wind stirred through a high window. The flame of the lamp flickered, but didn't go out. Shallum opened his eyes slowly, and in the stillness, a thought pressed heavy on his heart. Some thrones are not meant to last, but every man leaves behind a legacy, either of pride or humility. He rose, quieter than before. Something in him was breaking, but something else was being rebuilt. By afternoon, Shallum gathered his council in the narrow chamber that overlooked the city gates. The mood was grim. "We've had no response from our scouts," said one advisor. "That usually means they've switched sides or fallen." Another slammed his fist softly on the table. "Menahem will not negotiate. He's marching here to take what he believes is his." A young guard entered the room with urgency. "My king," he said breathlessly, "a messenger from Menahem is outside the gate. He requests an audience." Shallum stood without hesitation. "Bring him in." Moments later, a tall man with dust on his boots and a hardened face was escorted in. He gave a short bow, not out of respect, but custom. "King Shallum," the messenger began, "Menahem offers you a choice. Surrender the throne peacefully, and you may live out your days in quiet. Resist, and he will burn the gates and raise no mercy." Whispers broke out among the council. Shallum raised a hand to silence them. He studied the man. "Does Menahem believe that threats bring peace?" The messenger didn't answer. He simply repeated, "He believes strength brings order." Shallum gave a slow nod, then dismissed the man with a wave. "Leave your answer with the gatekeeper. I will send mine by morning." The room erupted the moment the door closed. "We must prepare for siege." "No, we should escape under cover of night." "We cannot let this tyrant undo everything." But Shallum raised his voice above the others. "Enough." Silence. "I took the throne through ambition. I told myself it was for the good of the people, but the truth is, it was pride. I thought I could fix a broken kingdom from the top down, but I never asked what God wanted. I just took." He looked at them all. "There will be no blood spilled for my ambition, not again." They stared at him, stunned. Shallum stepped away from the table and toward the window, gazing out over Samaria. He wasn't a war hero. He wasn't Solomon. He wasn't even Zechariah. But in that moment, he was finally something he had not yet been: honest. That night, Shallum didn't sleep. He stood alone in the palace garden. No crown, no robe, just a man in plain garments with a storm in his heart. The moon cast long shadows across the stone path as he wrestled with the question that wouldn't leave him. Was there still a way to make this right? Just before dawn, he summoned the captain of the guard. "I want you to open the city gates," Shallum said quietly. The captain looked horrified. "My king, we must hold the gates." "No," Shallum interrupted gently. "No more blood. I won't be remembered as another man who dragged the people into ruin for the sake of a throne." The captain hesitated. "And what will you do?" Shallum gave a weak smile. "Face him, alone." By sunrise, Menahem's army was on the hill. The citizens of Samaria watched in fearful silence as their king, unarmed, with hands lifted, walked out the open gate and down the path toward the enemy camp. Whispers rose across the city walls. Is he surrendering? He's going alone? What is he doing? From the enemy's camp, Menahem rode forward, armor glinting, surrounded by soldiers. His jaw clenched as he saw the former soldier king approach without fear. Shallum stopped a few paces away. "No walls, no tricks, just truth," he said. "I took the crown through violence. I won't defend it the same way." Menahem's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I expected arrogance," he said. "Instead, I find a man who looks tired." I am, Shallum said, but not of ruling, of pretending, of carrying a crown that doesn't fit. Silence passed between them. Then Shallum took off the crown and set it on the dirt between them. I won't die for a stolen crown, he said, but I will live with a clear heart. Menahem looked down at the crown. You know I still have to take the city. Shallum nodded. But maybe you won't have to break it. The wind stirred. For the first time in a long time, Shallum felt light, not because he'd won, but because he'd finally laid down the weight of pretending. Shallum never saw the palace again. By sundown, Menahem had entered Samaria with his army. The city didn't resist. There was no battle, no trumpet of war, only silence and the sound of new orders being shouted across the courtyards. Shallum sat quietly in a borrowed room far from the city, surrounded by olive trees and stillness. A farmer had given him bread and water. Nothing more. He had once worn fine linen. Now his cloak was dusty. His fingers were blistered from working with tools instead of scrolls. His bed was a wool mat, not a throne. But for the first time in weeks, he slept soundly. News came quickly. Menahem rules now. He's collecting heavy taxes. He's cruel, fierce. Shallum only nodded when he heard. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply listened. One day, a child from the village asked him, "Were you really a king?" Shallum looked at the boy's wide eyes and smiled faintly. "Not for long," he said, "and not the kind you should copy." "But my father said you gave up your crown on purpose," the child added. Shallum hesitated, then said, "Sometimes stepping down takes more strength than climbing up, especially if you climb the wrong way." The child didn't understand fully, but the words stuck with him. Years passed. The Book of Kings would only give Shallum one short verse, a single sentence. But the people who knew the real story remembered more, that he tried, failed, and at the very end chose peace over pride. He left no dynasty, no palace. But in the quiet villages of Israel, stories were whispered of the king who ruled for 1 month and still managed to leave behind a warning, a memory, and a lesson that power without purpose crumbles quickly, and that ambition without God never lasts.